Welcome to Mind Beyond the Mission, a podcast for and by veterans and veteran family members. I'm one of your hosts, Brian McKenna, and I'm a strategic advisor at the Atlas Institute and a retired Canadian soldier.
And I'm Laryssa Lamrock, strategic advisor at the Atlas Institute and a proud military family member. In this podcast, we'll be diving into real issues experienced by veterans, former RCMP members, and their families.
We won't promise you that we'll do everything perfectly, but we can assure you that we'll be getting real about the experiences that so many of us have in common, but don't always talk about, or don't necessarily know where or how to talk about it.
We hope you'll find solidarity in our words and experiences, and most importantly, that you'll find a sense of hope that things can truly get better. You can live present in the moment and live life authentically.
Let's get into it. So you're joining us again for another episode of Mind Beyond the Mission. I am Brian McKenna. I served in the Canadian Forces for 19 years, so that makes me a veteran. It doesn't make me a doctor, so I'm certainly not going to be talking here about what you ought to do or giving advice on how to handle medical situations. What we do is we make sure our conversations are honest, they're from the heart, and we're talking about our experiences. Not just our experiences, but how it went for our guests.
And I'm Laryssa Lamrock, a proud veteran family member. And this podcast talks about issues that are of interest to veterans and families, about veterans and families. I'd like to share a quote as we start off today's episode. The toughest part of Mark Campbell's 9-year ordeal was being separated, not from his legs by a Taliban bomb, but from the uniform and the life that he loved. Wearing the uniform for me was my life's calling, says Campbell. It's what I did from the time I was 13. From Army cadets on straight through the reserves and into the regular Army. That's an excerpt from the Legion magazine from March of 2017.
So we're joined here today in Ottawa, and we're actually taping this in the hospital where we work. Normally we'll do it off-site or in the studio. So if you hear any hospital noises in the background, well, that's part of the flavor today. Mark and Donna are both here, so thanks for joining us. Been a bit of a trip to come here from Edmonton.
Yeah.
So it is a job. It's a calling, but it's a lot of fun. Being in the Army is one of those things that I don't think people stay in for the amount of time that either the two of you did for a paycheck or just something to do in the next couple of days. It really is in the soul, isn't it?
I loved it. For me, it was everything. It was my life's calling. They say some people are born to do certain things with their lives. And I don't know what I did in a past life if I had a past life, but I tell you, in this life, I was meant to be a soldier because that's what I was good at. That's what I derived enjoyment from. I liked living rough, living in the woods, running around the mountains, jumping out of airplanes, doing all that good stuff. And you talk about enjoyment, Brian, and that's the reason I stuck around for 34 years was because I was having a good time.
So today we are going to talk about how we got here. And how we got here specifically for the two of you. Mm-hmm. A decade before, where I was wheeling around Parliament Hill, you were deployed overseas advising the Afghan army.
Right.
You're a qualified paratrooper, former reservist, moved on to decades of honorable service in a regular force, accomplished soldier, accomplished leader. How did you become a medical patient? And then how did we get here to where we are today?
One wrong move. That's all it takes. One wrong step. And literally, that's what changed everything for me. In the course of an instant, everything flipped on its head, 180 degrees. It was a complete unhinging of my life. And all it takes is a zig when you should have zagged.
So tell us a little bit more, Mark, about, you served 34 years, you mentioned. So if it's okay, tell us a little bit more about that wrong move for folks that might not be familiar with yours and Donna's story.
Sure. At the time that I was injured, I was advising the Afghan National Army on basically teaching on-the-job training in combat operations. And we'd done a village clearance operation that morning. And the bottom line was we ended up on a rescue mission to save the life of a Canadian soldier who'd been shot and was going into shock and was likely going to die if he couldn't be evacuated. And so for them to evacuate that casualty, we had to take over the fight. And so that meant basically dispensing with what had been a deliberate operation and going to a hasty operation, which accepts more risk, calculated risk. And then that's certainly what we got. So We literally turned left and steamed about 400 yards north towards the sound of the fighting. We stopped to get a grip on our Afghans so that we could enter the fight in an organized fashion. And we were ambushed by me being blown up. And then they hit us from three sides with rocket-propelled grenades and machine guns, which is a pretty typical Mujahideen tactic for what we call a complex ambush. I was the one that they chose. They saw me as leadership. I'm sure they saw me talking on the radio and looking at my map and realized that I was leadership. I was wearing a different uniform, which we did for good reason over there, because we also had to liaise and provide a point of contact for Canadian forces on the ground with the Afghans. So they saw who I was, what I was, and they waited about 5 minutes while we got set. And then when I walked across the bomb, they detonated it. They blew it up. And that launched me through the air. And both femoral arteries were pumping blood to beat the band. And I knew I had a couple minutes to live. And that was my one wrong move. And that's what the result of it was. I yelled out for help. The soldiers were brilliant. Under fire, they piled on me, got a couple tourniquets on each leg to stop the blood, which saved my life. My senior medic saved my life again by giving me what's called rescue flow, which tricks the body into believing it's got more blood pressure than it actually has. That bought me about an extra hour to live with my reduced blood flow or blood pressure. Took about 90 minutes to evacuate us in a running gun battle under fire most of the way. To be honest with you, I couldn't tell the legs were missing, but I could sure tell those tourniquets were cinched down on both legs. The agony was indescribable. To this day, I can't put it into words for you. Just imagine the worst feeling you've ever had, hitting your thumb with a hammer and times it by 10, and then times it by 100, and then times it by 1,000, and you start to get close. Maybe. That was the start of a long, long process for Donna and myself. It marked that instant in time marked a massive transformation in my life in terms of what I was going to do in the future and what I would be able to do in the future. It meant the end of a career that had been my life's calling on circumstances which were not of my choosing. And that was difficult.
That is a big deal, isn't it?
That's tough to deal with when it's not your decision to leave. It's not quite time for you to leave yet, and yet you're leaving anyhow because you don't have a choice in the matter. And there were huge implications, not just for me on a professional sense, but huge implications for my family and for Donna and for our two children. Massive. It turned my life on its head. Well, it turned their lives completely upside down and 3 times around. Because unlike them, I was trained to deal with adversity. I mean, that's what the military does. It teaches you to deal with challenges. They throw challenges in front of your face continually to help you perform and learn new techniques and to do your job. And so I had been given that adversity training, or lack of a better term, I'd been exposed to that kind of adversity in my life. And losing my legs to me was just one more mega challenge. But not so much for Donna and the kids.
Yeah, Donna, you served in the military for 30 years as well. You were a veteran in your own right. I can't imagine. Thank you for sharing that, Mark. I can't imagine for you back home once you got word of the incident. Did anything prepare you for that as a family member? And what kind of was your mindset? Did you go kind of into operational mode in that minute? What was going on for you?
So the day before I was informed that Mark had been injured, I had this really weird feeling. And I had to sit down for like 15, 20 minutes. I don't know what was going on. I was out with the kids who were standing in line, waiting to get in. I knew something had happened, but I didn't get the call. I didn't have anybody coming to the door, that horrible feeling, that knock on the door that every military wife does not want to get. So I just carried on. So I went to work the next day and did my normal workout before work. And as I was coming into the building, I saw people looking at me weird, and I knew something was up. My boss took me downstairs to ASU Edmonton, and they opened the door to the conference room, and there was the rear party CO and another warrant, and I knew something had happened. The very first thing I said to them was, "Is Mark alive?" And they said, he's alive, but, and then they carried on and told me. And it was a big shock. I had to ask them 3 times exactly what happened. It took me a while to take it in, and they sent me home. So I went home, and I thought about it. What am I going to do? How am I going to tell the kids? They had told me that they would send the chaplain over afterwards. They wanted to know if I wanted him to come with me when I told the kids, and I said, no, I want to deal with this on my own. I picked up my kids after school. We got home, and I told them that their father was alive, but something had happened. It was very hard. The chaplain and the assisting officer came over shortly afterwards and spoke to the kids also. But I was kind of left on my own still to deal with it all. A friend came over. She sat with me as I was preparing dinner for them. I didn't want anything to be totally different for my children. So she just sat there as I made them dinner. And she said, why don't we just order takeout? And I said, no, I had promised them schnitzel that night, so we were making schnitzel. It did seem like a bit of a dream or a nightmare, if you want to call it that, because we never thought this would ever happen, or I never thought this would ever happen.
He's a pretty tough guy.
He is.
Right? Still a pretty tough guy. But these things, they have stages in which they provide us with difficulty. And Mark and I have spoken about this before. You know, the mental health challenges of physical injuries. I think sometimes people have a look at the event and they think, well, that's what it is right there. It's the mind strike. It's the gunfire, and albeit past me to say it isn't. There certainly is mental health challenges of that attack. Then there's mental health challenges of adapting to the new life. And there's mental health challenges of when the system just doesn't seem to have lined up with what we think we signed on to. And this is something that's really common in the community is there's an enrollment document. You raise your hand, you put your hand on the Bible, or you solemnly affirm or whatever. But at the end of the day, whether or not you read that fine print, you probably signed on to something that sounds like, if I get hurt, you're going to look after me. If I'm gone, you're going to look after my family. And when that unwritten covenant doesn't get lived up to, that burns in its own way. Does that make sense to you guys? Is that your sense of it too?
Dude, you just nailed it. I mean, for me, the effects of the gunfire, the effects of the bomb, the effects of losing my legs, those nightmares, the kicking with what's left of my legs in the night, the screaming, the running, the shouting out, that all abated, the striking out, that all abated after, what would you say, 2-3 years? Yeah. But I'll tell you what has never abated to this very day is my sense of betrayal because of the federal government of Canada failing to live up to its obligations with the social covenant that all soldiers serve under.
And that's where you're calling it, the social covenant. That's
social covenant. It's
right.
A social covenant. I mean, Borden stood up on the eve of Vimy Ridge and told the soldiers that were gathered there that they would have no cause to want from their government were they to be injured or killed in the attack on Vimy Ridge the next day. And so they attacked willingly, knowing that they'd be covered. None of this was ever written down. None of it was ever agreed to by the government of Canada. And when their feet were held to the fire after 2006 with the new Veterans Charter, and what we got was fundamentally different from what people had gotten just prior. Give you an example. When they adopted the new Veterans Charter in 2006, April of 2006, you can take two different soldiers. Soldier A is in a vehicle IED incident, loses both legs prior to 2006, gets financial compensation package A, which has big dollar signs attached to it. Soldier B comes along after the 1st of April 2006, is dismounted, hits an IED, loses both legs above the knee, exact same injury, exact same war, exact same location, exact same army, and a fundamentally lesser financial compensation package. And that, to me, it's all about betrayal. It's betrayal of our service.
So when you're back in Canada, and I'm trying to imagine a point in your life after the injury where you feel like you figured out how to use the chair, you've got the elevator in the house, you've got the hand controls on the car, like you've got the things.
Mm-hmm.
But then the reality of like, okay, this is my life going forward. I'm a middle-aged man and I've got to live with these injuries forever. That realization point, what's that struggle all about? What is that like?
I think a lot of it's a struggle of tempering expectations. Expectations about what the rest of your life is going to look like. I thought maybe I'd have an opportunity to travel the world. Well, there's a whole bunch of countries I can't go to because they're just not that wheelchair accessible. So, things like that. You have to temper your expectations. You have to manage your own expectations, and to a certain extent, you have to manage your family's expectations if you're going to be included in the family's activities, as limited as they may be going forward. So, yeah, a lot of it is managing expectations.
So many layers to both of your experiences, and Donna, I see this as much your story, if I can use that word, as it is Mark's. You are a remarkable woman. I've just met you. Kind of look at both sides of the experience as well. You mentioned once that injury hits the family harder than it hits the individual.
I believe that.
Tell me a little bit more.
Well, it goes back to the fact that I had 34 years of military training behind me in the infantry, and where they just keep throwing challenge after challenge after challenge at you, and they just make it harder and harder and harder, and you overcome those challenges, and it builds your self-confidence, and you move forward to the next. I had the benefit of that resiliency training when I was injured, and it served me very, very well. I just saw my lack of legs as another big challenge moving forward.
Right, the next obstacle.
The next obstacle to be overcome. So there was never any question in my mind about giving up and rolling over and dying, although there were times when I couldn't manage the pain properly where I wanted to die. But the biggest concern was the family. And the reason is the family does not have the benefit of that resiliency training, that lived resiliency training. It's not a 3-day course you can take and suddenly you're resilient. It doesn't work that way. You have to overcome obstacles in life in order to be able to overcome bigger obstacles later on. It's a learned skill.
Do you think we could chip away at it, though?
Maybe. It would certainly be worthwhile to try.
Interesting. One thing I wanted to ask, and Donna, you and I, we spoke about this probably about an hour ago before this taping. There's Mark's injuries, and then there's your ability to help Mark in whatever way that you can. But then there's Donna, the veteran, the individual, the woman on her own. When is the first time someone turned around and said, "How are you? How's Donna?"
So Mark was the one that realized that I was suffering at the point of a nervous breakdown. No one ever asked me how I was doing. No one asked me if I needed help. It was always the focus on Mark opposed to myself or the children, the family.
You got to remember, too, that was almost 15 years ago. So the military was in a very different place with families.
Yeah.
Saw them as baggage as opposed to integral supporters of the soldier in his career or her career. So it was a very different mindset.
Yeah, it's a different time. But how was that time?
It was very hard. Even as a warrant officer with 30 years experience, I was surprised and shocked that I had to fight the system. From the get-go, I was told Mark was injured. So I said, okay, I want to go overseas to see him, because I was told he wasn't coming back right away. I was told, no, you can't go. And I didn't know until afterwards. They initially had told me I couldn't go overseas to see him was because they didn't think he was going to last. He was going to die. Well, why wouldn't you let me go see my husband for the last time then? I kept fighting. Finally, they said I could go, but my children couldn't go. I said, no, my children have been told their father has been drastically injured. They need to see him also. And I had to fight again for them to go overseas. Finally, I was told I could take the children over, but they might not be able to see him when they went. I said, what's the point in that? But I said, regardless, let's go, and we'll fight for it once we get overseas.
And all this fighting is just corrosive to your mental health. And everything from the get-go was a fight for Donna. Because I was in the hospital. There's a cost to being crippled. Don't let me tell you about that. And we will. But I tell you, this was a bad, bad time. It was a rough patch. And all of this fighting that Donna had to do on my behalf while I was in the hospital was corrosive to her mental health to the point of permanent injury. And yet the system refuses to recognize secondary PTSD as a consequence of somebody else's injury.
So we asked you when was the first time someone asked you that question. So let me actually do it. How are you doing?
I'm okay now. I'm much better. But anytime Mark has a relapse or an injury, which he has, it all comes back again and becomes the beginning when he was blown up again.
Yeah, I have issues with my residual legs. I mean, I have to go for more surgery. I'm supposed to be in the hospital right now, but we had
more surgery.
Yeah. Revision surgery. I got problems with edema and fluid in the legs and circulation.
Over the last year, he's been going to the hospital
once a month for an infection.
To the emergency room.
Right.
Once a month. So then he gets ill to the point that his legs are going to kill him, basically.
Yeah. So it's based on edema and cellulitis and things like that.
So are you still revisiting that resiliency training that you mentioned?
Oh,
is that still required?
Oh, I'm tapping into it for sure. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's no fun spending 6 days in the hospital at any time of your life.
So kids bear a lot in this circumstance, and you're doing some work here in the world of kids, and you're speaking about your resiliency and the fact that the kids weren't trained in it.
Yeah.
But they do seem to find some resiliency.
Well, I think kids are naturally resilient. They do rebound, but there's only so much they can handle at one shot.
We were chatting earlier. Your children were younger when the incident, the injury happened, and they're both, you have two.
Yes.
They're both young adults now. And as we were chatting prior to this session, you were saying that it almost seemed like it wasn't until they became adults that some of the issues came to the forefront, and they have to come to terms with
initially we had them see a psychiatrist and see if they're okay, and they said they're managing. As they got older, things actually came out, and our daughter had a lot of issues in the beginning. In the end, she was able to overcome it. Our son still suffers from anxiety, but to get them any access to mental health, we had to have Mark's doctor certify that his mental health depends on theirs. So then they were allowed to get support through the system.
So you'd mentioned, you did say that things happened quite a few years ago. It was a little bit of a different system then, you'd mentioned. So how are you feeling as far as support goes now for your family, for you, Mark, as an individual, for Donna, you as an individual, and for your family?
We're pretty much in a position of stability in our lives now. I mean, it's 15 years since my injury. The first 5 were very rough years, bad years, like bottom of the bottle years for me, getting out of the bottom of the bottle years, and recovery and veterans transition network and all that kind of work, rehab, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it was a rough 5 years. It was very rough on the family. I mean, I'm not kidding myself. I put them through hell. And that was a function of the career choices I made, but it was also a function of just some of the individual personal choices I made when I was hurting. So yeah, it was a bad 5 years, but the last 10 haven't been all that bad. We live our lives, and our lives are different because of my injury. There's no question about that. Like I say, expectations are considerably lower for what we're going to do with our retirement, but it's not all bad.
We're going to talk a little bit about the cost of being crippled.
Yeah, sure.
So before your injury, you're driving your truck and it's still driving fine, but you hear a ping coming from the engine. What would you have done?
Well, I'd have pulled over to the side of the road, opened up the hood, and had a look under and see if I can figure out if there's a loose belt or something's wrong or a fan is ticking against the shroud or, whatever. I'd have tried to troubleshoot it myself.
Right.
Now I can't. I just phoned CAA. I can't get out of my truck, right? I'm in a wheelchair.
All right, round 2. There's only 2 rounds to this game. You and I are at Home Depot. We both see a discount ceiling fan. $50, good deal. We'll both buy one. Cost me $50. What's it cost you?
Oh, probably $500. By the time I hire a contractor to come in and install that fan, because I can't climb a ladder and I can't work with electricity on the ceiling because I have no friggin' legs. So everything costs me money. Anything wrong with the house, I would have done it myself. I can drywall. I can do all that crap. I've done it all before. But I can't do it now. I can't physically do it. I can't physically swing a hammer. You know, about waist height, I'm pretty good for about a foot. But that's about it. So I can't do that regular home maintenance stuff. Snow removal, cutting the lawn, getting up and cleaning the gutters on the roof. None of that. I can't even hammer nails into a door frame accurately and properly. So I have to hire contractors to do all of that stuff, and it's very, very expensive. Every time I have a problem with my house, I have to throw big wads of money at it.
Right.
Problem is the government ain't throwing big wads of money at me.
Right. I mean, there's money. There are some.
There is
things
some money, yeah.
But
I make about the same as I made when I was serving. Right now, when you take into account all of my tax-free pain and suffering, and then all the taxable items.
Right.
Yeah, by the time all is said and done, I make about the same as I made when I was serving. So I'm in a good situation, but I am the anomaly. I'm an outlier. I was a major when I got hit,
Right.
a senior major.
So the cost of being crippled for a corporal is staggering.
It's killer. They can't afford it. How do you raise a family, send your kids to university, maintain a household on $60,000 a year with no hope of improving your financial lot in life by virtue of your physical circumstances?
Right.
That's a pretty grim prognosis for the rest of your life. So you can see how somebody facing the rest of their life with that and me facing the rest of my life with a reasonable income.
So you did mention earlier, though, that like you made a point of saying this was a different era. It's not all that long ago, by the way.
Yeah.
But it's a different time ago.
Long enough for change.
So let's talk about that change. Donna, have you seen anything that you could put your finger on and go, this is better? They're doing it better now than when I had to go through this.
I don't know. I can't think of any that's better.
I can't honestly say that if this happened to me again tomorrow, that I wouldn't have to fight most of the same fights. I honestly don't know. I'd have to go through it again to be able to tell you.
Because when Mark went through, one of the very first things I asked his case manager, say VAC, was, do you have a list of all the things that is available to
benefits?
Us? And they said no.
They didn't. They didn't even have a shopping list.
You have to ask when you have a requirement, and then we'll tell you if it's available.
Why is this a secret? For 3 years, I went without clothing allowance.
I happened to be searching their website, and I found it one Christmas, and I told Mark to put in for it, that he was eligible for a clothing allowance. We lost out on, 2 years?
2 years worth, because it's only retroactive for a year. But, nobody tells you about this, right? It's only $150 a month.
Yeah, they told us that we should have known.
On my pants.
Well, how do you know?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. I did want to ask, it sounds like you had to kind of advocate for yourselves in a lot of ways and do research on your own. But I'm curious to know, was there anything that was uplifting and comforting in the process? What worked well for you?
The Secret Santa that was put on by the community and I would say friends. We still don't know who actually did it. People started dropping gifts off at the door.
12 days of Christmas.
12 days of Christmas. And it was very nice. Like, they weren't big gifts. They're just little
movie
gifts.
passes or something,
Yeah,
right?
But just knowing that the community was thinking about
Yeah.
it.
Exactly, because it was the first Christmas after Mark got injured.
Wow.
So it was nice to know after, all this traumatic activity that somebody was thinking of you.
You're really highlighting what small gestures could be like. Like, you're talking 15 years later against a movie pass, but you still remember it.
I'll tell you one thing that was extremely uplifting for me and confidence building and inspiring and all the rest of it was the Soldier On program.
Right.
Absolutely 100% fantastic program.
Okay, so give us your version of what the Soldier On program is. I know it, but it might not be common language. So,
it started out as a charity done by a SARTech by the name of Andrew McLean, who's retired now, Warrant Officer, ultra marathoner, long distance runner, great guy. Out of the goodness of his heart, he started a charity called Soldier On, and he used monies that he raised by going around hat in hand to corporations to take groups of disabled soldiers, sailors, airwomen, airmen, and special operators nowadays to go and do adaptive sports and better living through physical activity as a way of rehabilitating. And more than that, bringing together a community of disabled veterans was important, realizing that you're not alone, that there are other people out there facing the same challenges, the ability to network and share best practices when you're not busy skiing your buns off or doing whatever it is you're supposed to be doing with Soldier On. That's the main focus. Yeah, brilliant program. Brilliant program. Very pleased to see the Canadian
And you're not
Forces
the
took
only
it over.
one saying that, by the way. There's a lot of other good stories out there. I've heard about it. I don't know the program other than what I've been told.
Yeah.
But I know a lot.
All it is quite honestly, it's they have a number of coordinators who go out and organize events for mostly group events, whether it's a golf game or it's a sailing event or it's a fishing something, they're just opportunities. And based on your degree of disability and what type of disability you have, maybe you can or maybe you can't participate. Like I don't do particularly good on the cross-country skiing ones, but, I can sit ski. So downhill skiing, yeah, maybe I can participate. So Soldier On's pretty good about offering a wide variety of opportunities that just about anybody can find a spot for themselves on. And I think it's just a brilliant program. It's opportunities offered to the disabled, both serving and veteran, and sometimes family members. And it's a brilliant program.
You used a word as you were describing that, community, and even with the Secret Santa, knowing that the community was thinking about you. I think there's different ways to establish community. Through COVID, we learned different ways to make connections. So we're kind of hoping through the podcast, actually, and a veteran and a family member here having a conversation. We're part of the same community.
Right.
I wonder, I'm going to put both of you on the spot a little bit.
That's the best kind. I
That's
love
the
it.
best kind. Right at the end, I say that's my modus operandi. I think how I work. If you were to chat with another younger couple who were just experiencing what the two of you have experienced with a significant injury that impacts mental health, what would you tell them?
I'd tell them, come on over for a coffee and we'll sit down and we'll talk at length, because it's not something you can do in 20 minutes. And it's probably something that you would want to develop a relationship over and mentor that individual over time, as opposed to try to give them a shopping list of things of do's and don'ts.
Right.
That's not that helpful.
So I'm reading into
What's helpful is a sounding board.
Okay.
What's helpful is someone who's been down that road that can say, these are the pitfalls. These are maybe the advantages of looking at it from this perspective. Mm-hmm. I think there's great benefit to be had in people with like disabilities mentoring one another.
Okay.
So you'd offer them peer support.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
I think that's the most effective.
And you've experienced programs and treatments, and there's stuff you say is helpful, but you'd offer them peer support.
Yeah, the Veterans Transition Program I found very, very useful, very powerful.
And Donna, how about for you? What would you say?
Well, I found with Soldier On, it was great for Mark in the beginning, but I was jealous and envious because it was only focusing on him. Once they changed it and allowed family members to participate, that was brilliant, because then I was able to see him excel at a sport, say for sit skiing, something that he'd done previously, downhill skiing, but still was able to continue sit skiing, changed my mind about the program. I was like, to actually see him do that opened my mind.
And it also shows some growth on their part that they're willing to adapt it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're at this part now where we're wrapping up. One thing that's very apparent in the years I've known you, and also certainly in our conversations today, still a soldier.
Well, thank you for that.
And you want blunt answers, go ask people like this, so they'll tell you what they think. And yet there's always heart at the end. They'll turn around and say, yeah, I'll help that guy. And I really appreciate you guys coming and doing this. It's an endeavor to get out of northern Edmonton, Sturgeon County. See, I know. And
the endeavor starts here in Ottawa, and the lack of handicapped cabs,
and to wind up in Ottawa, and to do this with us today. It's been my pleasure to have you here.
Well, thanks very much.
Yes,
Brian.
thank you for having us.
It's been our pleasure being here.
Thank you both for your service.
Well, you're very welcome.
Thank you.
And just like the other time, there will always be more episodes coming out from Atlas Institute. And, every time we have a podcast, I get a couple of ideas of what the next podcasts have to be. Mm-hmm. So we're signing off. Thank you very much. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Mind Beyond the Mission.
If this conversation resonated with you or helped you in any way, I encourage you to subscribe to Mind Beyond the Mission wherever you listen to your podcasts, so you'll be the first to know when our next episode comes out.
And if you know someone who might relate to what we've shared or could find it helpful, please feel free to send it their way. We're all on the same team.
Plus, we'd love to hear what other topics you'd be interested in us exploring in future episodes. Brian and I have a lot of ideas and subjects we plan to dive into, but you, the listener, have probably experienced or thought of topics that haven't crossed our minds yet.
Please reach out if this is the case. We're on social media at Atlas Veterans CA on most platforms, so please feel free to tweet at us, send us a message, or leave a review on this episode, and let us know what else you'd like to hear us talk about.
Brian, it's always a pleasure having these important conversations with you. Looking forward to next time.
You bet, Laryssa. Take it easy.